This is part 2 of my response video.
I wanted to ask a bit about what is that? What are you referring to there?
99.999% of species, not organisms, species, are undiscovered. So our planet, the life has been on our planet for approximately 4 billion years, and all of the arguments that are being made for Darwinism is based upon 0.0001% of the data, right?
No, the argument for evolution is based on 100% of the data that we have. We have to make the best theory possible based on the evidence that we have, and that is evolution through natural selection and also other non-Darwinian methods of evolution. You do not get to propose other mechanisms until you provide evidence for them. I should point out that none of the evidence found so far supports yours or any other creation myth.
Right? Because most of life has lived on this earth and is become extinct. So, this idea that, yeah, we worked it out, we know exactly what we're doing. Well, how do you correlate that with, say, this figure that I just gave you, which is from the National Science Foundation? How is it possible someone could say with any certainty that this is beyond doubt and we know exactly what happened and, we have the tree of life and everything's worked out, when 99.999% of the data does not exist?
Again, science doesn't deal with absolute truths. And also, how much of the current data supports your creation myth? Please explain that.
Into it, what is the fossil record then if so much of life, cannot be discovered, or, we can't discover those fossils? What is actually the fossil record?
The fossil record in of itself does not mean that Darwinism is true.
The fossil record demonstrates changes in speciation over time. We can correlate the dates of these fossils existing based on numerous data, especially radiometric data, that shows when different species lived at different times. We can then draw good models of how species evolved. The fossil record shows that species changed but gives no indication as to the underlying mechanism for that change, so your point is irrelevant.
So let's start off with the first assumption, which is gradualism. So Darwinian evolution has an assumption that evolution works in a slow, steady way.
No, you're wrong again. There is no such assumption. It can work in a slow, steady way, but it can also work in a much faster way. If there is a rapid change in the environment, which allows speciation to occur rapidly to fill up new ecological niches.
Darwin wanted to see in the fossil record is he wanted to see a gradualistic, linear stage of evolution, organisms evolving in that way.
This is another common creationist tactic, to attack evolution as if it is a religion based on the saying of one prophet, Charles Darwin, when in fact evolutionary science has moved on huge amounts since On the Origin of Species was published in 1859.
Secondly, another assumption is that it is actually natural selection which is creating new organisms, creating body plans, giving us our, all the traits that we have.
It is based on what the evidence shows and the fact that it is the best supported theory that fits the evidence.
However, the problem with the argument that natural selection drove the evolutionary change is that the evidences given for it don't really add up to make it seem as powerful as it needs to be in order to actually account for biodiversity. Because all you'd really see is this type of tiny evolutionary change, but the argument they would make is, well, that small evolutionary change over a long period of time means large change. But again, that's just an assumption. You're just thinking, okay, well, if this has happened, then over a long period, you can have a monad to a man. You can have a very small organism turning into eventually an elephant or whatever.
Yes.
But the evidence for that is not really there.
The evidence for that is actually there. You're just repeating the microevolution versus macroevolution trope that has been trotted out by creationists. We see major changes through the fossil record. Even within a single person's lifetime, we can see major evolutionary change. For example, the Italian wall lizard and the Lenski long-term evolution project.
Which is why, interestingly enough, natural selection is being challenged by mainstream evolutionary biologists. For example, Lynn Margulis, also known as Lynn Sagan, the wife of Carl Sagan, divorced later on. But anyway, she was an atheist evolutionary biologist and an award-winning one. And she said natural selection conserves. It doesn't create. It doesn't do these things.
Here is another classic Subboor tactic, the misquote. Lynn Margulis did not dispute natural selection, just that she thought there were other mechanisms involved as well. She proposed the hypothesis of endosymbiosis to work alongside natural selection. Endosymbiosis does not explain population genetics, which natural selection does.
So, we find lots of academics actually challenging this idea that natural selection, which is supposed to be the primary driving force, that this is not the case. And
notice how he mentions lots of academics without even naming anybody. For the one quote he does provide, I've just shown that to be wrong.
And then let's go to another assumption, the assumption that gene is the unit of selection. This is the assumption of the modern synthesis, neo-Darwinism. Now, this was popularized by Richard Dawkins in the 70s, and what it basically tried to do is it tried to explain not only our anatomy in terms of breaking down natural selection working on our genes, the selfish gene idea, actually also our behavior. Now, what's interesting about this is this was flaunted as a success story, that whether you are kind or you're egotistical, you are a product of natural selection working on genetics, and it's your selfish genes that want to replicate, and you're simply a vehicle. And this book was very popular, The Selfish Gene.
Right.
And over time, mainstream evolutionary biologists and mainstream philosophers of biology turned around and said, this is complete garbage.
Again, can you name any of these evolutionary biologists who say this? Altruism is well explained from a gene's eye view, as shown in The Selfish Gene. There is evidence for this. A simple Google search found this explanation, and there are other articles in reputable journals that one can easily find.
For example, there's a famous Australian philosopher, and again, an atheist, not a religious person by any measure. His name was David Stove. He wrote a book called Darwinian Fairy Tales, in which he completely blasts this idea that, we're good because we want to, it aids in our reputation, or we help our people, like our brothers and sisters, because they also carry our genes, and, all these types of ideas.
David Stove was an Australian philosopher who was a critic of sociobiology. Others, such as Richard Dawkins and Stephen Jay Gould, argued that genes played a role in human behaviour, though there is a complex relationship between nature and nurture. We should also remember that David Stove asserted that racism is common sense and that the intellectual capacity of women is on the whole inferior to that of men. I'm not sure I would want to quote such a person to support my views.
We all help support hospitals, which is survival of the unfittest. How is that somebody we related to? Or how is that a reciprocal altruism? We give charity anonymously, right? We're not hoping to get something back.
These are explained very well by anybody who has a functioning brain. We have evolved to see suffering as bad. That's why it brings discomfort to see other people suffer. That's the reason why we give to charity and help. Even if you don't care about other people, it makes sense to support hospitals and other support systems, because you never know when you might need it yourself. I will pause this analysis now and resume in video number 3. Thank you.